Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live Women's Connect series. My name is Maureen Dennis, and I'll be your host for this evening. We're going to be discussing a subject around neurodiversity, and I've been a childcare practitioner for, it's got to be about 30 plus years. So I'm really looking forward to our discussions this evening. I want to welcome all the women watching online, the men, the families, children, everybody watching online from the Church God of Prophecy across the United Kingdom in all of our regions, Region 1, North London, North and South, Region 2, from Region 3 in the Southwest, also Region 4 in the West Midlands, Region 5 in Yorkshire and the East Midlands, and Region 6 in Greater Manchester. I'd also like to welcome anybody that's watching now or watching a little bit later that might be abroad in Europe, Caribbean or Africa. And, while you're watching, if you're watching wherever you're watching from, just put your name or where you're watching from in the chat. And let us know where you're tuning in from. I want to give special greetings to our National Presiding Bishop and his wife, and also to our National Women's Director, who is Minister Joyce and Minister Alni Powell. So, as I said before, our series tonight, our episode tonight, we'll be talking about neurodiversity, and we've talked about it as a team together, and we've called it beyond labels, neurodiversity. And for many, this might be a new term for you, but hopefully, as we go through the evening, we'll start to unpack some of the terms that we're using, and also some of the thoughts, and also do some myth busting around neurodiversity. I am so privileged to have three esteemed guests on tonight. That's Dr. Jenny Wilson, also Kim Dallas, and Tanisha Maddox. And I'm going to go over to them for them to introduce themselves. So over to you, Jenny. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, my name is Jenny Wilson. I've been a practicing psychologist now for 30 years within the NHS, private sector, and children's social care. My job predominantly supports people with moderate to severe mental illness, but as a neurodevelopmental psychologist, one of my specialisms is supporting families where there's a neurodiversity, and just building that awareness of the diversity so that it doesn't manifest into a mental health condition. Thank you. Over to you, Maureen.
So, Kim, would you like to introduce yourself to our online audience?
Yeah, my name's Kim. I'm an educator. I've been working in mainstream for over 16 years. I'm currently an assistant head teacher of inclusion and SENCO. I'm very passionate about SEN and supporting young people in education. I'm also a neurodiverse adult, and I've faced my own challenges dealing with that in the workplace and obviously in education. I'm just here to share my experiences, my knowledge, and my passion for inclusivity. Over to you, Tanisha.
Hi, my name's Tanisha, and I'm a mom. I've got 3 children with ADHD and 1 with ADHD and autism. And I'm just here to give you a little glimpse of what it looks like to live in a neurodiverse home. And handing back over to you, Maureen.
Thank you, Tanisha. I am so looking forward to this discussion this evening. I hope you are too online. And if you do have any comments, just feel free to put them in the chat. If we do have time during this episode tonight, we will try and get to them. So first of all, we're going to actually talk about neurodiversity and try to define that for you. And the first person that I'm going to be going back to is to Jenny, Dr. Jenny, can you just explain neurodiversity to us tonight?
Sure. I'm just waiting for the slide to come up, but if it doesn't, then I will. There we go. So, what is neurodiversity? Neurodiversity is a fairly new terminology that we're using in the field of mental health, learning disabilities, and education. And it describes the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways. We're not all the same. There is no one right way of thinking, learning, and behaving. And the concept of neurodiversity believes that differences are not viewed as deficits. Different is just different, and it's okay to be different. And that's neurodiversity. Next slide, please. So, like I say, being different is absolutely okay. And the word neurodiversity will refer to the diversity of all people, but it's often used within the context of an autistic spectrum condition, as well as other neurological or developmental conditions, such as ADHD or learning disabilities. And the range of differences in individual brain functioning or behavioural traits that are normally regarded as part of a normal variation in a human population. So we see it often in autistic spectrum conditions because it is a spectrum. So not every child on the autism spectrum is going to look exactly the same. You may have a child on the start of the spectrum who is non-verbal, no speech, no language, even possibility with a medical disability as well. As we move up the spectrum, we have children who have a little bit of language and the will to communicate. And we get to the top of the spectrum, the very high functioning IQ through the roof young people. So we can't clump everyone together. And that's why I like the terminology neurodiversity. It's okay to be diverse. It's okay to be different. Lots of stigmas are attached to differentness. Particularly in some communities, they see it as a negative. They see it as the parents' fault. Fingers are often pointed at the family because they have a child that is different. But actually being neurodivergent means that their brain is just working differently to the average neurotypical person. They're not broken. They're not unwell. They're just different. Next slide, please. Now, here are just some of the conditions which may be described as neurodivergent. Now, there's lots, and I could go on all night talking about the different conditions that come under this umbrella. But the ones that we most commonly hear about when we talk about neurodiversity is autism spectrum conditions, Fragile X and other genetic conditions, ADHD or ADD, so that's attention deficit disorder without the hyperactivity, Down syndrome, learning disabilities, and global developmental delay. So sometimes, we could have a child who's struggling and their learning is not progressing and they're not meeting their milestones. And your pediatrician may give you that diagnosis of they have a global developmental delay. So they're delayed in many areas. Or dyspraxia, just to name a few. You may have heard all of these being described as a neurodevelopmental condition. And I think most pediatricians and psychiatrists still call it a neurodevelopmental condition. The shift in language actually aims to increase the acceptance and inclusion of all people, whilst also embracing their neurological differences. And a very important note to make, a person can be neurodivergent with or without a mental illness. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are mentally unwell because of their neurodiversity. Next slide, please. People often ask, why are assessments, diagnosis and care plans important? And families often say to me, we really don't want a label. Don't label my child. When we get to that stage of assessment, diagnosis, and care plans, the reason why I believe it is important to name what's happening. A thorough assessment and a treatment and support plan is so important for the person with neurodiversity because it helps us to establish what their education, social, and medical needs may be. And if we don't know what we're dealing with, it's very hard to manage. So that diagnostic explanation may help the individual and their family to understand their differences better and enable community connections rather than people be afraid of this person that's different. And often when I do talks to parents up and down the country and abroad, that question comes up again and again. Fine, you can give us a label, but how can we manage? What do we have to do differently as a family to support this person? How can you help us to understand the condition in a way that we are starting to break down stigmas? And when somebody points the finger at our parenting, we can explain the condition to them. That's always a place to start. When people are saying, there's something different about this child and I find their behaviour very challenging, I always pause and think, challenging for who? It would be challenging for the young person. It will be challenging for the person who doesn't understand the condition. It will be challenging from the teacher that's trying very hard with a classroom of 30 plus children to manage a child with a difference. But it will be extremely challenging for the child who starts to believe that there's something wrong with them or they're beyond repair. If they've seen numerous professionals and so many adults have said to them time and time again, you're just not getting it right, they will believe they're beyond repair, and they don't need repairing. They're just different. And so it's for us to adapt the way we do things. Additionally, neurodevelopmental conditions are sometimes associated with other health issues or mental health issues that require monitoring and treatment. So if we don't get to that stage of assessment and diagnosis, how can we put a care plan in place that supports their education, social, and health needs? And it's important that people who need the desired behaviour support and those interventions to promote their communications, social, academic, and daily living skills, that they access this sooner rather than later. Very important note that I will end with. Approaches and interventions cannot be one size fits all, as all individuals will have their different goals, desires, and needs. And I tend to say this a lot in therapy sessions. One type of therapy doesn't fit all. One type of medication doesn't suit all. One type of teaching may not suit all, because everybody's still an individual, regardless of their neurodiversity. Thank you. Back to you,
Thank
Maureen.
you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Jenny. That was fantastic. In a moment, we're going to be looking at some famous people that are neurodiverse. But before that, I just want to go over to Kim, our assistant head, who is also a Senko, and she's going to talk to us about what does neurodiversity look like in school, and just give us that context in school and how that shows up, please.
So obviously I'm going to give you the context in a mainstream school. It's important to know that there are special schools that support children with complexities of need. But from a mainstream perspective, as Dr. Jenny said, there's differences in all. It's important to know that there's children with autism, ADHD, oppositional defiance disorders, and learning difficulties within a mainstream school that teachers will have to support and adapt their teaching to meet the individual needs. But I think that's the most important thing, that every child is going to, with neurodiversity, will experience school in different ways. The child that may have autism and ADHD may be fine going through the school day, but may just need to leave lessons 5 minutes early because they have challenge of feeling overwhelmed on the corridors, where another child will struggle in a lesson and need that one-to-one support or support in external interventions. Every child's experience that has neurodiversity will be different, and that's the most important thing within a mainstream school. It's trying to adapt your teaching and the support that you can give to match that individual child, as opposed to all children, because you can't, as Dr. Jenny said, lump children in this one box that fits all. It's not going to work. And it's about making sure that teachers and the adults that are supporting those children have the training and the knowledge to be able to identify and know how to support those children. And that could be through having a learning plan or strategies that even the child gives them to be able to know how to adapt for that child to be able to learn and progress. So it's different for every child. Hope that answers the question.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much. We're going to come back and discuss that a little bit more later on in the programme. We're going to go over and look at some videos about people who are neurodiverse but have been really successful. I think it was Dr. Jenny that was talking about stigmas, and we just want to really say this is not, this night is meant to be empowering, and to let people know that if they are living with neurodiversity, that it's probably a barrier, but it doesn't mean that you can't achieve what you want to achieve. So shall we play that video? Wow, isn't that amazing? All those famous people who have been successful despite neurodiversity, and it is really about that support and recognizing that a person has an additional need and trying to meet that need. So we're going to go over to a deeper discussion with our panel this evening. I'm going to come to Kim first. And so you started to talk about school and the school context. So what would you say is the process for obtaining classroom support for children with neurodiversity? You did start to touch on it about perhaps leaving the classroom early, 5 minutes early, or that sort of feeling they can have within school where they're overwhelmed. Could you expand on that a little bit more?
I think within mainstream school, what we tend to do is we gain information as children transition through school. So I'm obviously in a secondary school. So we would get that information from transition from primary to secondary to be able to know how to support those children. However, if we didn't get that information, teachers are constantly looking out for signs and symptoms that children may have. And we do our initial assessments. We call it something called the graduated approach, where we would assess, plan, do, review for our children that we have concerns for. So part of the first step would be to assess, and with parents' permission, that is, assess those children to determine what we're concerned about. And that could be processing difficulties. That could be anything from going and doing an observation in class to see what they're struggling with in terms of behaviour. So we'd follow through with doing that. The main thing that I would say is the most important thing to do is to speak to the students, speak to them to find out from them what they're struggling with, what they feel that they need. I think that's the best way of supporting those students, because students know. I mean, when I was at school, I knew that something wasn't right. I was struggling, and I knew I could pinpoint exactly what it was that I needed. And it's about creating a plan for that child where we can monitor what strategies we've put in place to support that child. And that could look very different. Like I said, it could be in-class support, it could be external support of going into doing those group interventions, it could be social skills. So at break and lunchtime, having a group for specific children that supports them with even engaging in conversation to make friends with peers. The classroom support, the support in school is going to look very different for different children. So it's really hard for me to pinpoint what that would look like for your average typical child with autism. But there's a range of different things that schools are doing now to support students. I mean, for example, emotional-based school avoidance is a massive area at the moment, and anxiety. And at my school, we have a special provision for children that are struggling with that, where they're not pushed to go into the class. They're supported in another area that's very nurturing, where they can get that one-to-one support. Different schools are trialing many different things to support students with the complexities of need. So it's really hard for me to say what one thing can happen. But I'd say the main thing starts with talking to the child, and also what happens in the class with the teachers. So making sure that they're prepared to be able to teach those children and adapting their teaching to support the individual child. And that can be as small as, oh, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Just before I go over to Dr. Jenny, you mentioned assess, do, review.
Assess, plan, do, review.
Assess, plan, do, review. Could you just say a little bit more about that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so an assessment could be, for example, you gathering all the information from your teachers, gathering how a child presents in each different class. For example, the do would be putting strategies in. So that could be a plan for the child that says what the child wants and what you should be doing in every lesson for that child. And that could take the shape of a plan as well. And then you would review what you have put in place. So you're constantly at every, let's say, term, assessing what you have put in place. And that can go towards putting evidence together for an EHCP or to get additional funding. So that assess, plan, do, review system is really important in schools, that we are following that process. And every school will have their own way of doing that.
That's great. And would that be a whole school approach once you've got
100%.
that plan in place?
100%. And it has to be shared with every member of staff that's supporting that child. Yes.
Thank you. So, Dr. Jenny, from your perspective, what would support look like for a young person who is neurodivergent from your perspective?
I totally agree what's been said by Kim. You know, one size doesn't fit all. So it really is important to do that assessment and see what that particular child's additional needs may be. For me, support should be across both settings. So if something's happening at home and it's working, if parents share that with the school, then it can be across both settings. For a lot of children with additional needs, you know, things need to be consistent and predictable, you know, and it could be as simple as somebody's using different language to explain what they're doing. To that child, it's no longer the same thing. So that consistency across the board, I think, is very important. And not just at home and at school. Often when I do parent training programs, I invite grandparents, I invite childminders, so that again it's consistent in all the settings that that child is in. From my perspective as a psychologist, I believe that the support that's in place should be mindful of the absence of that support impacting on that child's mental health. And the reason I say that is, you know, if you imagine you're going to an environment every day that triggers high anxiety, but Monday to Friday, probably 8:30 to 3:30, the law of the land says you have to go to this place, and it triggers high anxiety. Now you times that by 12 years of feeling anxious every day. I would be very surprised if they don't show up at some point in some stage of mental health services without the right support. because that's a long time for the brain to hold a high state of anxiety. We know that the average child's brain can manage 30 minutes maximum of high anxiety before it starts to manifest in frustration, aggression, flight, fight, sometimes freeze in the situation. They just cannot move, they cannot communicate because their anxiety is so high. So you imagine doing this for 12 years in that high state of anxiety. The support to assess, plan, do, and review is totally what I support of what it should look like in the classroom, but also at home. So if you put a plan in place, for example, if you give your child a visual schedule to get them through the day to manage their anxiety, it's really important to plan for when you're going to use that. Now, we know that Christmas Day comes around every year, and we know that it sometimes is a time for children with neurodiversity to feel very anxious.
Yeah.
For children without neurodiversity, the surprise element and the I don't know what's coming up next is very exciting. For the neurodiverse child, change in lessons, there's a school play, and then another lesson gets cancelled, and they get home and the lights are all bright and they're on a sensory overload. It can be quite overwhelming. So we know it's coming every year. 25th of December will come every year. So let's plan for it. Let's plan for those situations that trigger that anxiety in advance. And let's not wait until the child's literally having a panic attack through the roof. And then we think, we haven't got a plan. Plan in advance. And then if it works, do more of it. But do review it. Review it with the child. Do you think this is working? Give an example of how it's working. Is there anybody else we need to share this plan with to ensure that it's consistent? And I'm sure Tanisha could relate to this. There's nothing worse than you getting your child's anxiety down and managing so well, and you hand them over to somebody else, and they hand you back a big ball of anxiety. And it takes you most of the week to get them back to that baseline because the person hasn't been aware of the plan. They haven't had a good understanding of the particular condition. So when they think they're doing their best, they might actually be making things worse. So I do agree that, if we assess, we plan and review, whether we're at home, whether we're at school, even in Sunday school, all it takes is for the child to be in a setting for more than 30 minutes in that high state of anxiety and confusion and despair, unable to flight, and then going back home to parents who are trying to put that right for the rest of the week. So totally, I would say the support looks like that. The support should also be very transparent and easy to explain to the child. The reason I say that is it can be very difficult for siblings who are not neurodiverse because it can look as if they're getting special treatment. I wouldn't get away with that. I did that. So it's really important that the siblings also understand what the support looks like. And a nice way to explain to siblings is, if there's something different about your brother and sister, they may need a different style of teaching in the classroom, but they may need a different style of parenting at home. So I'm not giving them special treatment. They're not getting away with things. When a lot of siblings have told me that in sessions, they're getting away with things. Actually, they're just having a different style of parenting to the style of parenting you have. And they normally can give me an example of someone in their class that has additional needs that's getting a different style of teaching. They may have a TA working with them. They may have to go off to a quiet room sometimes. They may have some sensory needs and have to be removed from assembly sometimes. So that's really easy for siblings to understand. It's a different style of parenting because they have a different way of understanding the world around them. Not wrong, not bad, just different. I hope that answers the question.
That's great. And I was just thinking about Christmas when you're talking about Christmas, and sometimes you can occupy children with neurodiversity because there's so much going on. Sometimes they can be occupied, but even those sort of shorter holidays like half term, to have a plan. One of the strategies perhaps to have a plan on the wall. The 6 weeks holiday, that's quite hard
Yeah.
to fill, isn't it? Sometimes. Can you just give parents just a few tips that, because I'm going to come to Tanisha in a bit, because I bet she's got loads of nuggets of how she plans, but some plans that you could do around that long 6 weeks holiday. I'd imagine it's quite challenging for some for parents with children with neurodiversity, and probably they might dread the 6 weeks holiday, thinking, "Oh gosh, how am I going to feel this?" So, what are some of the tips, Dr. Jenny, that we could give to our parents in terms of planning for that long break?
Absolutely. And the fact that it's different is part of the problem. The routine's gone out of the window. I often hear neurotypical children saying, "Oh, I can't wait for the 6 week summer holiday. No school." But for a neurodiverse child, the fact that their routine has changed and they're not getting up at the same time, they're not getting in the car, taking the same route, going to school, knowing the timetable like the back of their hand, it's all gone out the window. That in itself could trigger the anxiety. So I would say have a plan for each day and don't make the plan too rigid because they will hold you to that. If you put on the plan breakfast is at 9 and you've run out of milk, so breakfast is 9:15, that in itself could trigger anxiety. Don't promise Weetabix if we're on the last one and we're running out. That could be a trigger. So create predictability for the school holidays in a similar way to the way that school is a very predictable environment. So even though there's no school tomorrow, going to bed at a similar time, waking up at a similar time, having some structure to the day goes a very long way. But also being aware that if your child's neurodiversity doesn't respond well to being overstimulated, make sure that there's not too much stimulation. So some children love to fill their holidays with lots of electronics, but we know that too much electronics can be overstimulating for the brain. And when your brain's overstimulated, it's hard to switch it off and go to sleep. So then that leads to a battle at bedtime and a battle when you say it's time to switch off the electronics. So have it on the schedule, the start time, the finish time, but more importantly, what we're going to do next. For a lot of neurodiverse children, when you say stop, it feels like stop forever. It's really important, especially for the child with learning disabilities, to almost have a now and next schedule. This is what we're doing now. This is what we're doing next. We're not going to go any further than that. I may have another 10 things on my schedule that we're going to do for the rest of the day. But that's just enough for the child to manage now and next. And when we finish, now and next for the next part of the day, until we get through to the end of the break. I think what's really important as well when there's school holidays, towards the end of the holidays, to start preparing for the transition back into school. And I'm sure you see this a lot, Kim, that transition back in can be really difficult if you're in a new classroom, new teacher. Everything feels different. Your timetable that you just learnt to a T has changed. It no longer feels like the same place. There's just too much going on. But unless you understand what that child's additional need is, we can't put these schedules in for everybody. So my advice is know the young person that you're dealing with. Know what their strengths are as well as their difficulties. Sometimes it's very useful to use their special interest and their strengths as a part of their plan. So if we've got a now and next, the next might be actually 10 minutes of your favourite activity. You can talk to me about trains for the next 10 minutes. And then next, we're going to return to something else. It's always a nice way to give them something to look forward to. And we don't have to break the bank. We don't want to start promising them PlayStations and expensive things, but we're going to introduce the things that we know gets them thinking and gets them smiling. And then we have those timeouts scheduled throughout the day. And it could be a very simple timeout. It could be that we're just going to sit quietly and we're going to do a massage together, or we're going to sing together, or we're going to go for a walk for those 10 minutes. But it's on the schedule every day. Might just be the part of the day that they look forward to.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Tanisha, I'm going to come over to you. I'm going to split your question into two, but just carrying on from what Dr. Jenny has said, you live this. This is your world. So
Yeah.
I always say in my field that parents are actually the expert. Yes, we study and we're professionals, but parents are the experts and they know their children really well. So I'm just wondering if you could share some of your tips around how do you plan for holidays? How do you sort of keep routines for your children and keep their anxiety levels low?
Wow, that's a really interesting question because all three of my children have different types of ADHD. So my eldest daughter has the combined, which is ADHD-C. So she's got a lot going on with her. My middle daughter has ADHD-I, which is more of sort of the mind. Your mind might wander. It's those children that you typically see in class that are daydreaming or they're doodling on their hands and they're just not focused on the lesson. And then my youngest boy, he's got ADHD-H, so the hyperactivity. So it's really difficult finding activities that will engage him because he needs that constant stimulation. Whereas my child, she can find the, sort of on the go, too much for her. It's that overstimulation that Dr. Jenny spoke of. It's that overstimulation for her. And she just sort of checks out and goes to sleep, really. She can't handle it. She can't handle the pace. And my eldest daughter, she kind of can go with either or. So with her, sometimes she likes a lot of activities, and then there's other time where she wants to sort of just be by herself. She needs that time to just relax her mind and just unwind from the day. So it can be really, really difficult. I try and just do something across a span of a day. So I'm taking them out. There'll be activities where my son might be able to do something. If they need the time to have a break, there's somewhere we can sit down, have lunch, and sort of unwind a little bit. We might then end up going to the park, or we just get some takeaway, go home, eat together, and that way I kind of fit everything in with all of their needs. But it can be really difficult, and we definitely have to have our equipment with us. So fidgets, these sort of things, kids love these, or these balls they can squeeze. They're really great. What I love to bring with me everywhere is this. I've even given it to my kids' school. So it's got the zones. I'm sure many of you have seen this, the zones of regulation. I am always checking in. Oh, how are we feeling? Are we feeling red? Are we feeling blue? Are we feeling green? And even if my son can't really read, he's only 2, but I'll just get him to just point to one of them so I can kind of get him familiar with it from when they're young. So if you do have a neurodiverse child, from the time they're young, try and get them to understand their emotions, how they're feeling, so that they'll be able to communicate that to their teachers when they're in other settings. And I think that's just something it's a must. Yeah, definitely have your fidgets, definitely get them connected with their emotions and try and just understand them. There's nothing better than speaking to your child. How does this make you feel? How does that make you feel? I mean, my eldest daughter, we had a big issue with school uniform. For the longest time, she would refuse to wear her school uniform. She would refuse to wear it. I could not get her to wear it. And one day I just sat down and I said to her, okay, why don't you want to wear it? And she said, I don't like how it feels on my skin. It feels like something's crawling on me. So I was like, okay, we can adapt to that. Also, another issue with her is that she would take her shoes off. Wherever she is, she takes her shoes off. Her teachers would complain. She takes her shoes off at school, in the lunch hall. She's constantly taking them off. So I'm wondering, what's the problem with the shoes? Why do you keep doing this? I would buy her new shoes and she would just refuse to wear them and say, I don't know, that I don't like them. They feel strange. Nope, not wearing them. And it just came down to she needs shoes that have a comfortable sole. She does an activity in her feet and she said that she can't feel the floor when she's walking and the shoes make it worse. So she just wants to take them off so she can feel like she's connected to the ground and she can feel things. So definitely what you said, Dr. Jenny, about just communicating with your child is key. Just communicate with them, understand them, and then you can get on the right track. Then you can start to solve things. But if there's no communication, if you don't communicate with the school as well, it's just going to be so difficult. It's all about everyone working together to make a smooth transition through your child's education. Yeah.
That's great, Tanisha. So
And
you've
back
got
to you,
three
Maureen.
children. Dr. Jenny, you want to jump in there? That's
I
fine.
just want to jump in there because what Tanisha said is so spot on. You know, the
Yeah.
amount of young people I see coming through the door at CAMS with those sensory issues, and they sometimes describe to me as if I don't take my shoes off, I don't feel grounded. Therefore, I can't listen, I can't concentrate, I can't do anything until my shoes are off. And I know some of the other clinicians think I'm a bit crazy, but I take my shoes and socks off too. And we have the session on the floor with our shoes and socks off because they feel grounded. And I often say to parents as well, it's really important about those textures because it's the difference between having a really smooth day and them feeling completely stuck. So that the way their socks feel inside their shoes, if there's a discomfort there, that's going to affect their concentration. So
Yeah.
having those shoes and socks off, and sometimes, we get the cotton socks and we dry them on the radiator or we dry them on the clothes horse. That in a pair of new school shoes, that's going to lead to a bad day. So, I say to people, I'm not advertising for Marks and Spencer's, but get the Marks and Spencer's cotton socks because you can wash them, you can stick them on the heater, you can put them anywhere, they still feel comfortable on their feet and soft. And it's little things like that, like you said, Tanisha, checking in with them that really helps. It's the difference between them having a really good day at school or them just starting off first thing in the morning with that discomfort.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Thank
fantastic.
you.
So, Tanisha, you've got three children with very different needs, and that's a really great starting point, I think, because as we said at the start, you can't clump children together. So clearly at the start, you're seeing them very individual and you're making other people see them as individuals rather than just three children with neurodiversity. So you've been able to separate them out and see what their needs are and see where it crosses over and where it doesn't. So, how have you? What tips would you give parents then in terms of that process and getting involved in schools and communicating who your children are to a school?
Oh, definitely speak to the teacher before it starts the school. Speak to the teacher because the person who they're going to be seeing first thing in the morning, that is the first person they will see in the morning. I know where I go to work, my tutor group, I've got maybe 3 SEN children, and I know they need a really relaxed start to the day. So we go in. I let everyone sit down. They can chat to their friends for 5 minutes, and then we do the register. Then we start getting into the notifications for the day, what they're going to need to know, where they need to be, because they can't handle all that coming at them at once. So what I tend to do with my kids as well, I say to them, right, you're going to be having a school meal today. I let them know every PE. It will be after lunch. What action that I know from the teacher, I let them know just so they can in their head. If they know at some part of the day they're going to be doing PE, and at some part of the day I'm going to have an assembly. My middle child really struggles with assembly, so I like to let her know it's assembly day, okay? So we're going to have to practice our crossing our legs and sit down for as long as possible. If you're struggling, speak to your teacher. So it's also really good to get your child comfortable speaking to the teacher about how they're feeling, so that they're just all in unison. It's about just getting it right for the child and not trying to make them fit into the square. Because I find that some schools sort of have their policies quite set in stone, and as you said, it doesn't work for every child. You have to be able to move with the child and see what works best for them, or it's not, their education is not gonna, it's not gonna develop, it's not gonna progress the way you want if they're having these little things that are just holding them back. And I think having ear defenders as well can be great. Sometimes classes are just noisy, and kids just can't, once the noise starts, they check out and they can't get back into it. They can't get themselves back into the lesson because there's so much external noise going on. So it's just really important to just find out what the classroom environment is going to be like, the schedule for your child, and make sure you tell your child that, communicating with them every day. Because I don't know about other neurodiversities, but with ADHD, you will forget because your brain just pushes it to the back of your mind. So you will forget you've got coming up that day, what's going to be happening. So it's that constant reminder, as you say, team. So it's Monday today. Do you remember what we have to do on Monday? Okay, so on Monday, you have a PE day. After school on Mondays, what do? We do gymnastics on Monday after school, don't we? So we're going to have our gymnastics bag in the car ready, everything sort of done for them. You're just teaching them when they grow up. I always worry about when they grow up, going to manage these things. So doing these little routines when they're younger, getting them accustomed to, you know, communicating with people around them about what they need for their routine to go smoothly as well, gets them just in that process. When they grow up, they'll be swimming. I say to my kids, you'll be fine. You will be fine when you're older because you're so used to being in routine, communicating, and that's how you're going to go. So you're going to continue, and you're just going to fly from when you're in school. When you leave, you're going to fly.
So let's move on a little bit. We're going to talk about signs and symptoms of neurodiversity, but I think we've sort of covered that. I think we've said a lot about the signs and symptoms, the things that you can look for. But one of the questions I wanted to ask, is there a difference between boys and girls? Does it show up differently in boys or girls?
Yes.
Go on.
Yes.
Who wants to take that one? Do you want to say something, Kim? Being in a school, how does it show up?
I want to say that it's very easy to see it in boys. Well, I find being in this industry for a long time, it's very easy to see signs and symptoms for, I'd say, ADHD and autism in boys. However, what I've noticed of late is girls are very adept at masking their difficulties, coming up with strategies to be able to deal with what they're struggling with. So I feel that they are very good at masking, and so they put on this facade that they are wonderful and happy and getting on, but then they'll have difficulties with friendships, or they'll make up with friends, break up with friends very quickly. Girls, I've noticed, are the ones that are very good maskers. Boys cannot tend to do that. I mean, I might be wrong. Dr. Jenny, tell me if I am. But also I notice puberty. So I'd say year 9 and 10 seem to be the biggest year groups for girls. Where you're noticing, okay, this is different. Something else is going on. Anxiety is really at an all-time high. They don't want to come into school. Emotional-based anxiety. A lot of CAMS referrals I'm doing in year 9 and 10 for girls. I would say, like I said, I'm neurodiverse myself. I started to notice things in myself around those ages as well. So I think girls present very differently than boys, in my opinion.
Can I just jump in there, just for the older viewers? What is year 9 and 10? What age are children in year 9 and 10?
Now you're asking. So
that 13, 14?
13, 14. Yeah, that's what age I feel that they're definitely coming out. And they say, you know, what I've heard is autism, and Dr. Jenny will correct me if I'm wrong, girls tend to develop earlier. I don't know if that's a thing, but I've heard quite recently that girls are developing quite early on. So before they're 11, they're developing, and then they mask until they're 13 and 14, and then these signs and symptoms are coming out. But obviously, Dr. Jenny's done more of it than I have, so maybe go to her and ask her. But that's something that I've noticed as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It does look different in girls and boys. And I think that onset of puberty is probably the first unpredictable change in their body that they've experienced since they were born. And it's a massive change. And in the boys, we see the frustration and the aggression coming through when puberty starts, particularly in ADHD and autism, because the impulsivity part of the ADHD takes control. So you imagine you've got a condition that has that impulsivity that says, do the first thing that comes into your mind. And then you've got the hormone drive coming in with that as well, and the testosterone coming in. So you're probably not going to pause to think about what that first thing is. You're just going to do it very quickly. So you see that impulsivity. What I tend to see in the girls is the opposite. They overthink. They overthink everything. So the anxiety starts to come through. And in sessions, we always describe it as the what if thoughts. I see so many girls with what if thoughts, and they just can't switch them off. Those intrusive what ifs. What if something awful happens today? What if I make a fool of myself today? Whereas the boys are quite impulsive, and if they're going to make a fool of themselves, they're going to hit something, they're going to do it. Whereas the girls will do a lot of overthinking, and that worrying could lead to keeping them awake. Sometimes it impacts on their eating. They start to control other things in their life, what their food intake is, and then it starts to look like something very different. So we do see some differences with between males and females, but sometimes also, particularly with autism, we see the girls going under the radar because society kind of accepts that you have a girl that's a little bit shy, she doesn't talk as much, she goes under the radar. Where it's very quick to notice the very quiet, withdrawn boy in the classroom when the others are full of lots of hormones and making them get more boisterous. That person's getting further and further into the background, more within themselves, not speaking, not wanting to be part of an interaction. That's what we'll see in our boys. And often, we will send off a report from the school, say, can you tell us what you see about this child's interaction? And at a glance, you might see them with a group and think, oh, they're socializing, they're with a group of friends. But if you take a closer look, you'll notice that the quality of that interaction is missing. So are they instigating the conversation? Are they maintaining it? Is the game that they're playing on their terms only? So is it their way or the highway? Or actually, are they allowing other people to have a perspective? How are they coping with change? So very simple thing, the bell goes, the game's over. Are they able to straight away come back into the classroom? Or are they struggling? So these are the things that we will notice by looking just a little bit closer at the children, and noticing that there's something different going on there. I noticed that the first lesson after break time is a bit challenging. I noticed that the first lesson after lunch break is a bit challenging. So, because it looks differently in boys and girls, we do have to take a really good look so we don't miss anything.
Thank you. And I was just thinking about boys in particular, where it might show up as behavioural issues and how that can be challenging in a school to manage that, and how also children can end up with the wrong label. So the naughty boy in the class, the bad boy, the poor influence on other young people. And so I don't know how. We'll move on to our next question, because when would parents start to think? I think Kim said it. She said she knew she was different. She knew there was something different. Also, Tanisha is able to explain her children, and that was, I've learnt tonight, Tanisha, about ADHD. And I didn't realise there were letters to that. So when does a parent think, actually, my child's not just being naughty, they're not just being zoning out, something's going on here, something's a bit different? Where does the GP fit into all of this? When do we decide I'm going to discuss this with the GP? Dr. Jenny, do you want to take that? I think you might be
Yeah,
the...
sure. Often the GP is the first port of call, but if there is an underlying neurodiversity, you'll find it will be a very multidisciplinary approach to assessing and supporting. So it could be your health visitor that takes the first look, could be your pediatrician, which is referred by the GP. It could be going into the surgery and describing the symptoms. But it's really important to have a good relationship with the school where you could ask them to start that assessment and observation nice and early. so that you can just almost confirm, is what I'm seeing the same as what they're seeing? So is this now happening across two settings? Now, there's another reason why I say that. When we are assessing for autism and ADHD, we are looking for it to be across more than one setting. So if somebody comes in and says, my child just kicks off only when we go to visit grandma and gets very hyper and all the rest of it, but nowhere else, we're not seeing it anywhere else, then we want to have a very close look at the different settings. Because usually it's not so easy for a child to switch their condition on and off. It's there. The brain is functioning in a very different way. So we will see some signs of it wherever they are. Might be more subtle in one environment than another because of the way the environment makes them feel. But if we take a close look, we might see some stemming behaviors. We might see some, need for their fidgets because they can't concentrate. But it might be subtle in some environments than others. So if you're starting to notice, okay, we've put lots of things in place, there's not much change. We've tried really hard to liaise with the school, and I'm still getting reports that nothing's changed. Then it's time to think, right, let's do an assessment. We might not come out with a label, we might come out with strategies. Often, we will get a GP referral through to CAMS, and we might start off with, let's try some behaviour modification strategies to modify the behaviour across home and school first, before we go down the route of saying, right, is this ADHD, is this autism, is this dyspraxia? So what we're doing is we're just having a closer look at the child in different settings. So the GP is sometimes the first port of call. The good thing about going through the GP is the one healthcare professional that stays with you throughout your life, from birth to death. Everybody has a GP. So if there's something going on in your child's life, you know that if it's in your GP records, you've got that consistency there. But it's really important to realise that when you're going through the assessment process, you may have to repeat more than once your story of what's going on for your child, their developmental history, what's going on at home, what's going on at school, when did they walk, when did they talk. The good thing about the NHS now is that we're all on a central system to avoid people telling the same story over and over again. Because to get to the diagnostic stage, you may have seen the Senko, a psychologist, a speech and language therapist, a paediatrician, an education psychologist, your GP, maybe your tier 2 therapist, maybe the school CAMS worker. Lots of different people have had a look. They've turned your child upside down and inside out, and they've had a look. Because it has to be the National Autism Plan, and the National Plan for Neurodiversity does say that you have to have a good look. 30 years ago, when I came into practice, you could walk in and one psychiatrist will take a look at your child and give a diagnosis. The National Plan no longer states that that is the way. It has to be multidisciplinary, more than one professional. And it has to be the voice of the child and the parent in that assessment. So things have shifted quite a bit. And I must say, I feel it's safer now. I never feel comfortable with an online psychiatrist taking a 10-minute look and then prescribing methylphenidate by the end of the session. That just never fit comfortably with me at all. So having a very careful assessment with multiple professionals, the voice of the parents, because I totally agree, you are the expert on your child. And you've been the expert on your child from birth. Most parents can tell you within 6 weeks what that cry means. Am I hungry? Am I wet? Am I tired? Do I just want a cuddle? At 6 weeks, most parents can tell you what that cry means. You're the interpreters of your child's non-verbal communication from a very early age. So you are the expert on your child. So the parent's voice is important. And if you're not getting through with the GP, your health visitor, the school can also start the process going. It doesn't have to be just one professional. I think you was going to jump in there, Kim. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think Kim wanted to jump in, didn't you? I think it was at the point Dr. Jenny was saying it feels safer, and then I think your hand went up.
Yeah, I was going to say there is a growing need where parents are going and having private assessments for ADHD and autism. And I would just say, yes, I do think the process of going through the NHS and that process is very, very rigorous. You know, different professionals are involved in that. But there are parents that are struggling and are going down the private route, which does cost them a lot of money, especially if you're going to get the medication down that route as well and not other routes. So I would just say I understand that need to go private. I understand why parents are doing it. I myself have thought about it for me too, because I'm still on a waiting list. So I do understand, but it's just being mindful, doing your research into going down a private route and making sure that you feel 100% comfortable with that fee and how much it's going to cost when you have to go and get that medication for your child. Because I just feel like not all of them are as rigorous as we would want. That would be my warning on that little one. I don't know if you want to say anything, Dr. Jenny, in regards to that.
Totally, totally. Definitely do your research, make sure that they are governed by a national governing body, that the healthcare professionals that work there are chartered by the Healthcare Professional Council and recognised by their governing body. The psychiatrist is registered under the Royal Society of Psychiatry. Because, yes, there are a lot of people out there taking the money, doing very quick assessments and medication. And I totally get it as well, Kim. When you've been on a 2-3 year waiting list just to be seen, just to get through the door, you think, gosh, how can I shorten that? And I often say to parents, using a lot of the behavior strategies and the things that Tanisha has talked about, you can do with or without a diagnosis, because a lot of these things are just anxiety management and planning. There's no side effects from doing a visual schedule. There's no side effects for planning for the school holidays, for keeping that child's emotional regulation as stable as you can. So, I understand the desperation, but yes, do be careful.
So we're just going to move on a little bit and talk about EHCPs. Now, I do believe in the education world there are so many abbreviations. So EHCP, for those who are watching that doesn't know what that means, it means an educational healthcare plan. And earlier we was talking about assess, plan, do, review. And before we get to the stage of an EHCP, that cycle needs to happen quite a few times. Am I right, Kim? That happens. But I want you to talk about an EHCP. When does a parent think, right, no, I really want to go down that route? But also the other question I want to ask: can parents drive that forward? Can parents drive an EHCP forward?
100% parents can drive it forward. What I would say is there's 3 levels. So your first level is your universal level, where schools have to provide support to children on the universal level, adapting their teaching at that level. Then you have your targeted level. Imagine I'm going up my pyramid. So targeted is where you put targeted intervention in to support that child within school. Like I said, that could be social interaction intervention, literacy intervention. And then you get to the specialised level where you have an educational healthcare plan. Okay, so children that have an EHCP get additional funding outside of the school's funding to support that child. And that support will be at specialised level where they would have targeted intervention, they may have an LSA in the lesson, they may even have time outside of the school timetable to go and do external things that are going to support their going to support them.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
LSA. What is that? What's an LSA?
Sorry. A learning support assistant or teaching assistant. They're called different things in different areas.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
So at the specialised level, parents can do an application for an EHCP, and yeah, that's fine. They would put an application in themselves. What they can do is go to an external provider that can support them called CENDIAS. Please do not ask me what that stands for, but it's a parent carer organisation that support parents with the process of an educational healthcare plan. However, what I would say is it's always best to have the school behind you or even helping you with the application for an EHCP. It's better to have all those multi-agency professionals involved and champion you having that EHCP for your child. The process is long, and sometimes it does feel like you're jumping through hoops to try and get that support for children. And I always say to the council that I work with, if I'm putting an application for an EHCP in, know that I've done as much as I can. I've put as much intervention in and nothing seems to be working to support this child to progress. So I need something else to support me with this child. Okay. And it doesn't mean that I want that child to go to another school. It means that I'm doing as much as I can. I need your help. Can you help me here? So the process is in different areas will be different ways. When I was in Milton Keynes, it was creating a SEND plan, which goes through the assess, plan, do, review at least 3 times for that child. So 3 cycles of that. The first part would be going through parents writing a chronology for the child on from when they were born, if they had a normal birth, through to when they started to walk, through to any milestones or any delays in that milestone, family history of need. But yeah, it's a comprehensive document that goes through everything for that child, every strategy, every intervention, if it worked, if it didn't work, and what you've done since then. So yeah, it's a comprehensive process. It's multi-agency. Where I am now, we have an EP, an educational psychologist, come in and assess that child, meet the parents, go through that, put that plan together, come up with strategies for that EHCP. But there's also ones that get rejected, and we have to go to a way forward meeting where I sit there really upset to say that we haven't got that plan. I know what to do to put in for the next one of what I'm going to do to get that child that support that they need. But yeah, EHCPs are a massive thing, and they support the child, and you have to have parents, the child, everyone involved in that process.
And so you're talking about an EHCP that can help you within the school, give you more resources, probably a learning assistant, give them one-to-one, or that sort of space that they need to learn. What about if that school isn't suitable? Can an EHCP help to transition a child to a more suitable school where their needs can be met?
100%. Like I said, I recently put an EHCP in, and that was rejected. And we were putting in a provision for that child that was above and beyond what mainstream schools put in for that child. This child needed a setting that was more suitable to their needs. And that may be a medical place where they can go because their mental health is that bad that they can't access school, or it could be a specialist provision, or like I said before, it could be where the child comes in for 2 days a week and has that education at school, and then for 3 days a week they're going somewhere else where they can do mechanics or learning a different skill that's going to support them with something that they want to do going down the line. It doesn't just have to be school and mainstream school. It could be a multitude of different things that's going to support that child.
So is an EHCP just a plan, or is it a legal document?
It's a legal binding document that all schools must follow. That's why I tell every member of staff. And every year I, as a Senko, review that with parents, and that I also invite the child in. And I might involve other professionals to come sit around, look at the strategy, the provision, and the targets for that child. And we come up with a different set of strategies, or we say how phenomenal the child's doing, what their next steps are, so they're aware of what they need to do going forward as well. Yeah, it's a legal binding document.
Thank you, thank you, and I think that's quite important for parents to know, that it's not just a process that just sits in the drawer in the school. It's something that needs to be implemented, and it needs to be and every part of it needs to be implemented. Every single strategy. Go on,
Yeah.
Kim.
Can I just say, there is a massive thing at the moment where parents are wanting to take their children out of school for homeschooling. If your child has an EHCP, it is then up to the parent to make sure that they're following that legal binding document to a T with homeschooling. So I just wanted to say that one thing. It's still also for the parent to put that provision in place as well if they're homeschooling.
That's great. That's really helpful. Dr. Jenny, I want to come to you before I go back to Tanisha. I read somewhere that autistic spectrum condition is not necessarily a learning disability, but half the people on the autistic spectrum have a learning disability. Can you explain that?
So you can be on the autistic spectrum with or without a learning disability. So as a psychologist, we will do an IQ test so that we can see the difference between a learning difficulty and a learning disability. So somebody with an IQ below 70 struggling with learning would have a learning difficulty, and somebody would have a learning disability, and somebody with an IQ above 70 but struggling with learning would have a learning difficulty. So the disability means your IQ is below 70 and you're struggling in all areas. So remember, autism is a spectrum. So you've got children on one end who will struggle with their learning, and they may have a learning disability, low IQ, or they may have some learning difficulties. And that might be because they're struggling with the environment. It might be that they're struggling with their concentration, attention span. It may be that the style of teaching just doesn't work for them. So they're having difficulties accessing the curriculum. So yes, you can have children with or without. You can also have your very high functioning young people. We used to put them in the category of Asperger's syndrome. Their IQs are extremely high. You know, they're your Oxford University students. They're on that spectrum, but their IQs are very high. And I know the National Autistic Society really drove for the neurodiversity label because they just didn't like the idea of everyone with autism being clumped in the same category. There's a very big difference. But one thing I must say, and this is very important because I've picked this up through my old 30 years of practice, you can have a child on the high end of the autism spectrum. You could have your Oxford University student, very, very intelligent, in a state of anxiety that has been maintained over a long period of time. Don't be surprised if they become disorganized, non-verbal, spinning on the spot, and forgetting how to operate the shower to get out the front door. So that role of, holding on to that anxiety and people just not adapting or manipulating the environment in any way, shape or form over a long period of time could have your high functioning autistic person looking as if they have a learning difficulty and are lower down on the spectrum. And we often see that, particularly when there's a dual diagnosis of autism and ADHD. And the impulsivity and the inability to switch off that busy mind that they have might interfere with their learning to the point that you're not actually getting an accurate reading of how well they're doing and how much they understand. You know, I've seen a student who absolutely is an A-star student, but anxiety got the better of him. His ADHD became overwhelming in the exam, and he could barely put his name on the exam paper. So we do see that role of, you know, anxiety and stress and emotional dysregulation coming in when they've been in an environment that just has not been adapted to meet their needs over a long period of time. And sadly, you know, they will come out with much lower grades than what their real ability is because of that.
Okay. I want to ask an additional question because we've heard about the challenges that children can have. I'm just wondering, maybe, well, anybody can answer this. Can children change over time? So, for example, you might have a child at age 7 who really struggles with their sensory, you know, really can't, doesn't want to wear a tie to school or has to wear jogging bottoms because the school tries. Over time, could that change, or is that it forever and a day? Do children with neurodiversity evolve and change and develop new skills and mature, or is that it? How does that? What does that look like?
In my
Kim,
professional
I'll let you
opinion, I have
answer.
seen,
Sorry.
yeah, I have seen
Okay.
some change in children over
Mhm.
a period of time. And what it is, it sometimes shifts to something else. So it might be that they learn to tolerate the textures, but there's certain smells that they can't tolerate. They can't
Right.
bear having the shower on their scalp. A young man told me recently it feels like someone's dragging nails through his head if his mum washes his hair under the shower. So it's kind of shifted from one thing to another. Sometimes, you know, they'll come into school and the varnish on the floor just smells too strong at the beginning of the school term. The caretaker's been in, he's given the floor a good buffing, and they just can't cope with that. Whereas the term before, it might have been something else. It might have been the sound of the school
Okay.
bell. So we do see some shift over a period of time. So it's always worth thinking that if it's a sensory issue, we've all got five senses. So there will be at different times different senses that are going to be heightened for that young person. And so it may look as if something else has taken a back seat and now they're struggling with a new condition. I don't know if you've noticed that with your children, Tanisha.
Yeah, I was going to ask
Yeah.
Tanisha, have you seen them grow out of things and change and evolve over time?
Yeah, definitely with my eldest daughter. At first, I was really like positive about it, and I thought, oh my gosh, maybe she's gonna grow out of this, and maybe she's not actually got ADHD or autism, maybe it's something else. And I was like really hopeful about it. I will say to parents, just watch it, because especially in girls as well. What my daughter was just doing is masking, realizing that she's different to the students in her class. And I guess when they hit around 7, 8, they start to be more self-aware, aware of what's going on around them. She just started to mask. She was masking and pretending and acting as if she was fine. And, no, I don't need my ear defenders anymore. And no, it's fine, it's fine. And then she'd come home, and for the first hour, she would just be horrible. She would just be like, no, everyone leave me alone, and really nasty and really just in a bad mood. And it would take about an hour for her to just relax and come back to her usual self. And I realized something's changing. Like, you're getting on better in school. Your teachers are saying, she's getting on really well. Everything's going well at school, but now everything's going horribly at home. What's the difference? And as I said before, it's just communication. I spoke to her about it, and I was like, what's going on? You're not, this is not like you. And she just opened up eventually and said, it's the pressure at school. you know I'm not like everybody else, and I just want to fit in, and I'll do anything to just fit in. It was really hard, actually. It was a really hard conversation. So I guess in some cases children do change and grow out of things, but if they are changing and growing out, just watch it, be really vigilant, make sure that it's something that's genuine, not something that they're just trying to make themselves fit the mold of what everybody else is. So yeah, it can be positives and there can be downsides to it all.
I think Kim just wants to jump in there.
I would agree with both of you. I've had a child that had an EHCP, and I was new to the school, and I was going through that EHCP with that child. And I was like, yeah. And they were going, yeah, I'm doing that, I'm doing that. And I've got a strategy for that, and I've got a strategy for that. And I was like, oh, that's wonderful. It almost seems like you don't need an EHCP anymore. And actually, when it came to that child doing the exam, they just crumbled because they could not maintain the strategies that they were using in the lesson with that amount of anxiety and stress with the exam. So it's just important, as both have said, to have conversations with that child to say that it might not work, and to have contingency plans as well for those children. Because in high pressured situations, sometimes children will fold and crumble, and they need someone to just step in and say, look, we're going to go back to doing this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kim. We are going to talk about the community. We'll have people watching online. We have people watching in Zoom, and they are the community. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. But when I was thinking about EHCPs, one of the issues or the challenges is for children is transitions. I think transitions are difficult for people, but for people with neurodiversity, transitions are very challenging. And sometimes what I've seen happen in my world of work is that children with the HCPs are transitioned at the same time as all the other children. So I'm just thinking about bringing out the fact that when children have EHCPs, when they transition into secondary school or when they transition into college, that's a different process to children without EHCPs. And actually their place should be secured first, or where they're going should be very well planned so those children know where they're going and where they should be transitioned to. Kim, you're nodding, and you've probably done this so many times, transitioning children probably out of school into college. Can you just really briefly talk about that process? Because I do think a lot of parents go along with the normal transition and don't realise actually you can choose where you're going, the right place for your child.
100% you can choose where you want your child to go. I would definitely say there's not that many special school places to be thinking about transitioning, and that's another area. But I would say making sure that you are speaking to your Senko at your school, finding out the school that you want your child to go to, or the college that you want your child to go to, or even the university. So let's not just forget, you've got the college, then you've got, we're a sixth form school, so you've got children that are transitioning to go to university as well. It's about making sure that you've got those links, inviting that Senko in for that EHCP meeting. I've got year 11s that are transitioning, and I'm already doing their EHCPs for the next school, and making sure that they're coming in, making sure that those children have that extra long transition, especially from primary to secondary. And let's not forget, there's also a transition within school. So there's transition from year 8 to 9, from year 9 to 10, from year 10 to 11. And I think people forget about those transitions, from key stage 3 to key stage 4, where children start GCSEs and they've chosen their subjects and they're like, well, I think I want to do this, but now I don't. All those transitions, it's about having those conversations, preparing those children for adulthood, and making sure that that child has the time to get used to what is yet to come, preparing them at every stage. And with the EHCP, you should be making sure those transition points are thorough, are easy, are simplified for those children, and they are prepared for what is to come. And parents are a pivotal point in each transition point.
Thank you,
I hope
Kim.
I answered
Thank
that
you.
for you. Yeah.
Thank you. We're going to talk about community, and for those of you watching online, you are part of that community, whether you're in church or whether you're in the community, whether you have a neighbour with a child with neurodiversity. We are part of that community, and there's that African saying, isn't it? It takes a village to raise a child. And so I wanted to ask Tanisha, how have you found the community? How has the community been for you? Has it turned up?
It really, really depends. In some ways, yes. Like at church, they're amazing. They've got a blackout tent in the back of the church. They've got sensory toys and stuff like that. And they've put an extra TV screen at the back. So if my kids are running around and fidgety and just constantly moving, we can just go to the back of the church and sit there. I can try and, ignore them and let them run around, play while I watch. So that's amazing. In terms of like community where I live, I mean, it can be a bit difficult. It can be a bit difficult, especially like if we go to the park and my child does something that is very out of character. Other parents might be looking and thinking, how could she let her child do that or say this? Or it's just that my child doesn't understand the rules of the game, or they don't understand the boundaries. So they may have done something that's so out of character, but and to another parent, they may look and think, oh my goodness, but I understand that I'm not as hard on them. They probably think, oh, you're not disciplining them as much. So where I live, I can, I get the looks and the scrutiny. But in terms of like school community, the parents around school are great. The church is really good. My family are really good. It took my dad a really long time to accept because, growing up in Jamaica, he's Jamaican. It's not really something that is spoken about, especially in like black families. We don't really talk about stuff like this, especially when he was growing up. It wasn't a thing really. So it took him a long time to accept that my children have neurodiversity. It's real. It's not them just misbehaving. They really are going through this. And I think now we're at a good place where, we all kind of know what to do. If their behavior is this, we still have firm boundaries. They're still children. They still need discipline, but we make that reasonable adjustment where we compromise a little bit and say, all right, let's look at our behavior, let's analyze what we've just done. Do you think that was the right thing to do in this situation, rather than just tell them off? Because half the time students don't understand what they've done wrong. Children don't understand what they've done wrong. You kind of have to explain to them, let's look back over that, what could you have done differently? And I think, as like more awareness grows of neurodiversity, I think that it will only get better from there. And it's just about finding the right school. I did move my children to a different school as well, because the first school they were at just weren't sort of picking up on things. And I remember someone saying, oh, I didn't know she had ADHD. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I was like, okay. You definitely need to make sure you find the right setting and just make sure you're communicating with people so they can get that understanding. So you don't want your child to go to school and get in trouble all the time for the same thing over and over because there's no communication. So it's just about letting everybody know, because there is more awareness, there's more support, more help and more understanding, especially with like sort of wearing school uniform, what they're eating, and being able to sit down at lunchtime is actually a huge task for someone with ADHD. It's a huge thing. So things like that, if the school can understand, there can be a bit of wiggle room, and okay, you can have a movement break and then you go back again, sort of things like that. So I think it's just about being open, not being embarrassed and ashamed of it, because even now there are parents that the Senko in my school will contact, and the parents are completely like, no, absolutely not, my child doesn't have that, and they just don't want anything to do with it, and it's actually hurting their child in a way. So it is about sort of just keeping that awareness spreading. It's okay to be neurodiverse. There's nothing wrong with your child. This, like, if you get a phone call from a school saying that we think your child may be on the spectrum, don't take it as in a personal attack. No one thinks that you've done anything wrong as a parent, and no one thinks that there's anything wrong with your child. It's just to help. So it's about parents being open. It's about us like doing things like this, spreading awareness, and hopefully one day people will just be aware and there won't be a need to explain every little single thing that your child does. But we'll get there.
Tanisha, you talked about your church and that the fact that they've got a screen, and what else do they do to help your children to be in church? What else do they do?
They've got sensory toys for my kids. So it's not just for my kids, it's for anyone who's got children that have got neurodiversity. They can come and play with some sensory toys, which I really, really appreciate, because sometimes they just need something to sort of squeeze on, or something different, rather than just being given a Bible. It's good to be given a Bible, you are in church, but sometimes they need that little extra push. Also, the children's church leader also works in a school, so she's very aware of children with SEN needs, which is just key. She knows what she's doing. She knows how to handle the behaviors. She knows that there might be slight differences, and I trust, and I think that's a key thing as well, trusting the community you have around you, making sure that there is a good relationship. You trust that person. As you said earlier, sometimes you give your children to someone and you've calmed everything, you've got them in a good headspace, and they go off and they come back and you've been given back a ball of anxiety. Well, yeah, it's just about building trust. Yeah, communicating with people around you that are going to be around your kids. How my child's going to react in this situation. This is how you'll support them. This is, my child may react in this way, and this is how we respond to that. And yeah, working in unison, it all goes together and it works for them.
That's great. I'm just thinking that there's probably people watching here like, oh, what could we put in place for children? Maybe they're thinking about children in their church now, or children in their community. I'm going to come to you, Kim. A couple of things that people could think about. Actually, we could put this in place because there's some churches that don't have all that room or might not have the finances. What are some of the sort of very low cost little adjustments that people perhaps could do? Sorry, putting you on the spot there.
I would say, well, when I went to church, I'm going to say what I would have loved. I would have loved, like, just everybody taking a break for like 5 minutes, just to be calm and just sit there in silence just for a little bit. And I know people could pray or whatever, but I just think a timeout would have been amazing. Or even modeling and using expressive words to say how you may be feeling. So today I'm in the orange zone. I'm constantly in the orange zone, feeling a bit anxious all the time. And you know what I do? I just take a break. Let's everyone just take a break, using the language maybe of the zones, maybe having the zones sign up there and the pastor actually using that terminology so children can then feel that they can use that terminology to express how they're feeling as well. I think just those little things would be beneficial, but modelling 5 minutes. I love the idea of having a space at the back where children can just take a time out, and the sensory sounds or sensory movement, or even everybody getting up and having a movement break. Those kind of things are important. Sitting still, sitting still, and just all that kind of stuff in a church I can't do that. So having a movement break would be amazing. I think. Just some ideas.
Yeah. And
Dr. Jenny, let me come to you.
you,
What
you
would
know
you
what?
say?
As Kim was speaking and Tanisha was speaking, it sounds like there's a need for people to celebrate difference and give
Yes.
the children permission to be different. It's okay if you want to go to the back and use the sensory toys. It's okay if you need to take a time out and have a break. Rather than that child thinking, oh, am I going to get in trouble for this later? Have I interfered with the church service today? But actually getting permission from everybody in the church that's okay. That's absolutely fine. Right away, you're doing what neurodiversity says. You're not seeing it as a deficit. You're not seeing it as something that's wrong with this child. There's something different here. So we're going to make the environment different so they can cope. And you guys put it so beautifully that, everything that you're talking about is going over and above, which is what the SEN law says. We can go over and above. For everybody that says, oh, I'm not making special allowances for them. If I do it for them, I'll have to do it for everybody. Actually, we do have to make special allowances for some people, because that's the difference between them coping and enjoying a setting, or by the time they get to 16, you dragging them to church against their will. This is so useful. I think that's a beautiful point for us to end on, because difference is okay.
Difference is okay. Absolutely. I could talk about this for another 2 hours. I'm telling you, I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking to all three of you. Tanisha, I've really enjoyed and feel really honoured that you've shared a little bit of your life and just educated us and made it okay. And also that you said it's hard, but you're doing it and you're doing it well. And the fact that you've shared with us this evening, I think there's a lot of parents watching tonight that will be thinking, I can do it. And also, one of the things I like that you said is that you've told your children, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. And I think that's really a real important message for people who are different, that you will be okay, because, and especially when you invest in your children in the way that you clearly are. So I want to say thank you, Kim. Thank you for your professional addition to this discussion tonight, and Dr. Jenny. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. I know that people wanted to talk even about adult neurodiversity, and I think that's going to be coming up in the next couple of months. So look out for that. But in the meantime, I want to say thank you. Thank you to all three of you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as I have. And I also hope that you've learned something tonight. And if you are a parent with children who are neurodiverse, if you take away nothing from tonight, is that to keep in mind it's okay to be different. And there's no shame in it. And let's remove the stigmas and let's get beyond the labels. We saw earlier all those famous people who are successful, and your child as well can reach their potential, whatever their potential is. I wanted to just do a few announcements for our women's department. Although we're only in 2024, we know that we're almost closing to the end. The end of the year is almost coming to an end with just 3 months to go. So we do have our ladies retreat, our international ladies retreat, every year. And that was going to be on the 23rd to the 25th of May. So make sure that's in your diaries. The other thing that we wanted to bring to your attention is there is a group called Let's Talk About Neurodiversity. So this is a group that will be meeting on the 1st of October, the Friday the 8th of November, and Monday the 2nd of December. This is for parents, and it will take place at 393 Cafe Hagley Road, West Birmingham, B32 2AL, and it's from 9:30 to 11 a.m. So if you're a parent and you want to get together with other parents and carers, you can meet up and just get support from each other. There will also be Zoom meetings for those of you who might be restricted in getting out, or you can't get to that space. So those details will be shared shortly. So we've come to the end of this episode this evening, and I just want to thank Minister Joyce and Sister Alni for this privilege to host this show tonight. My name is Maureen Dennis, and I've been your host this evening. We are going to go and end with a song from our youth in our national convention. I believe it was about a year ago. So I hope you enjoy that, and good night to everyone. Good night.
He who began a good work in me, he who began a good work in me, will be faithful to complete it, will be faithful to complete it. He who started the work will be faithful to complete it.
Hallelujah. How many believe that God is glorified? How many believe that he has been and continues to be glorified? He wants to be glorified in our lives, in our everyday walk. He wants to be glorified through us in our temples. So we're going to sing, be glorified.